Good afternoon, Chamber of Commerce webinar fans. Here we are again on a Tuesday with our webinar series. Going to start in a second here. Jeffrey Tumlin, Director of MTA, and Tiffany Chu with Remix. It should be an exciting transportation-related discussion. So just going to start in about a minute. Hello, everybody. My name is Rodney Fong, President and CEO of the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce, and want to welcome you to this webinar discussion focused on transportation. And one of our guests, Jeffrey Tumlin, has a great background of, he just put up of the cable car, which I miss so much, and we hopefully get that back online. Want to very quickly thank everyone for coming to this. As you know, we do this series a couple of times a week. You can find out more about them at sfchamber.com. And we're very excited to have our two guests, Tiffany Chu, CEO and co-founder of Remix, and Jeffrey Tumlin, Director of Transportation at San Francisco MTA. I'm going to go quickly into the bio just so we can get into conversation. And Tiffany is a designer, planner, and CEO of Remix. This is her team here who travels around the world, has clients around the world, planning and talking about mobility. She was listed as Forbes 30 Under 30. And has spent a significant amount of time with Code for America and was the first UX hire at Zipcar. Everybody remembers Zipcar, alum of Y Combinator, and has a great background in architecture, urban planning from MIT. And Jeffrey Tumlin, everyone's getting to know Jeffrey very quickly as he is doing a great job in San Francisco under an incredibly stressful time, but is making it happen. Jeffrey spent more than 20 years and has led station area, downtown, citywide campus plans. I know that he worked with Nelson Nygaard for many years and has spoken around the world and as well as 20 US states about transportation. And I can't think of a better time to have Jeffrey's knowledge, experience out the helm here, quite honestly, as San Francisco is in a restart, a reboot. We're all right there. And I think that's really the topic of our conversation today is San Francisco ready to experiment on some of the things that we've been talking about in the urban planning world as leaders of San Francisco, of urbanists, transportation ideas that have been talked about. And certainly right now, with the very simple shared streets, we're starting to see the very success of that. So Tiffany and Jeffrey, I'm gonna let you guys take it away. Thanks for coming today.
Thanks so much, Rodney. Jeff, it's a pleasure to have you as a webinar guest. And as a resident of San Francisco, I've been really appreciative of your leadership during this time. I can't even imagine what it is to be in the public sector right now. And I'll start with my first question, which is actually around the recovery plan. So San Francisco was actually one of the first on the MTA side to put out a 6-phase recovery plan with all the colors and the blocks. It was very visual on Twitter. Can you tell us and the audience, what phase are we in exactly right now?
So we actually just got set back a phase. So our phase numbering around recovery strategy is a little bit different than the city or state numbering because we've been focused on changes to what happens to the mobility system. A key indicator for us about our next phase shift is the opening of schools, which of course it was announced on Friday that schools will not be fully opening in San Francisco in August. I'm probably the only person in all of San Francisco who is relieved that we have a little bit more time to accommodate schools, which are a huge driver of mobility need in San Francisco, particularly given the economic devastation that we are facing at Muni.
So how does it feel to need to communicate to the public and to your staff that we're actually not moving forward, we're moving back right now?
I have taken a really blunt and transparent approach to leadership at SFMTA, which I think is a little unusual among bureaucrats. It's the only way that we can build trust, and it's the only way that we can be real with people about the economic and health realities that we're facing. This crisis is serious, and unless people take it seriously, they are not going to wear face coverings and they're going to congregate because it is, it's nuts being in shelter in place for months on end. But we see exactly what happens when people are not vigilant and don't take the crisis seriously. We've had a huge spike in COVID positive cases in San Francisco, and we're now well past the red zone in terms of hospital capacity. We do not want to have happen in San Francisco what we see happening in Florida and Arizona. Yeah. So bluntness and honesty.
So one of the markers I remember in, I think it was late March, when I realized personally what a crazy time that we're in, is when I think you announced to everybody, if you're not taking an essential trip, don't ride Muni. And you never thought you would ever be in this place to announce that, but here we are. What is the correct approach to telling the community if they should be riding transit now? Seeing that we're kind of not fully at a stage of full recovery, but we're kind of in between. Can people take trips? Like, should I take BART or should I not? Like, I don't have a car, so speaking for the rest of us.
So it's clear from all the health science that we have read that public transit is not a significant vector for virus transmission. The air circulation, the fact that people are not on it for very long, the fact that we've got remarkably high face covering compliance on Muni means that we don't seem to be a significant transmission factor. And yet, in order to be safe, we are still trying to keep people 6 feet apart on public transit. What that means is that in addition to the 30% capacity loss that we're experiencing as a result of the economic hit, we've lost an additional 2/3 of our capacity to maintain distance.
Mm-hmm.
So our message is, if you can avoid taking Muni, please save a seat for that essential worker for whom Muni is their only option. We're now at the point of recovery, however, where traffic congestion is nearly back up to what it was in pre-COVID levels. We have another maybe 10% more roadway capacity that we can handle people driving. After that, mobility becomes the primary obstacle against further economic recovery. So we're at this stage of recovery where we're having to start shifting people to emphasize more walking, biking, scooters, skateboards, mobility devices, rather than driving. So we'll be releasing our phase 3 slow streets proposal early next week, which is starting to head us towards a citywide network of streets that everyone can feel safe and comfortable using, regardless of their mode of transportation.
Well, that's really exciting. I live near both the Sanchez. I'm like equidistant from the Sanchez and the Shotwell slow streets, and it's been such a privilege to be able to use those. So thank you for that. One thing that I've personally observed, and this is coming from the seat of being the CEO at Remix, where I can actually go into our Remix collaborative software platform and see what cities and agencies are planning on the back end. We noticed at the SFMTA and also other cities and agencies that we work with around the world that there was like a huge uptick in Remix usage actually starting in late March. And we were like, what is going on? And turns out every agency, MTA included, we're creating like 10 different new scenarios of service plans literally over the course of a weekend. Like 48 hours, there would be like 4 to 10 new scenarios for every agency. So we saw that happen like behind the scenes, and it was just a crazy moment for us because we realized that what this meant for agencies was just the exponential number of scenarios that you have to plan for. And how does that translate to like an organizational perspective? Like the culture at MTA, obviously it's like many, many thousands of people. How do you enact this culture change of needing to move fast, rapidly change, experiment, and like make it okay and incentivize staff to do so?
Yeah, that's a very big question. It's helpful. So in my career, I spent most of my career in the private sector, but working for public agencies. So I've always been a little bit of a bridge among many worlds. In the public sector, there is a tendency to expect perfection. that tends to result in a culture of hiding the problem and blaming somebody else when there's failure. When we're in a period of time like this, where we have to adapt at a pace that is unprecedented, at least in our lifetimes, where you literally have to completely rebuild your transit system in a weekend, something that you would normally take 5 years doing, and then maybe not actually succeed in implementing because of the tough politics. It requires creating a lot more capacity for risk in a public agency, which means dealing with failure in a very different way. So we're having to focus our risk assessment not on embarrassment, but on safety. So we're avoiding doing things that put our workforce or the public in harm's way, but accommodate a lot of risk of political upset or embarrassment, or that system plan didn't really work, we need to make adjustment. And having people talk every day about their failures and how they made an adjustment and what they learned from it in order to inoculate other people in the agency, and to actually be proud of iterative, real-time project development, as opposed to spending 2 years writing a planning document and then another 3 years doing implementation. The challenge has really been about how do we do effective community engagement along the way. That's been a challenge, and it's also been a challenge making sure that we stay true to our equity objective, knowing that it takes oftentimes a lot more staff time to be serious about equity than to do simply what is easy. And I'm very proud, in fact, we were able to use the Remix tool in order to completely rebuild the transit system. I mean, back in April, we had to eliminate 3/4 of Muni lines. We're now slowly bringing service back, and in August we'll be up to half of Muni lines, but we have no financial path for restoring those remaining 40 Muni lines. And we were reliant on tools like Remix in order to make sure that we were allocating all of our service hours where they were most needed, and preparing ourselves for a lot of complaints from the most privileged neighborhoods that lost the most transit service. Because equity work is all about taking resources from where they're least needed to invest in places where those resources are most needed. And that's what we did with the transit system.
So if you're in this, it's not even a rut, it's like this canyon of, of funding just around the corner, not being anywhere near what you need to operate. Like, what realistically happens next? Like, is there advocacy that is going on? Like, who do we need to lobby to ensure public services like transit don't fall off a cliff?
So the CARES Act got us through the end of last fiscal year without layoffs, and they'll get us through the next quarter and a half. We then burned down the entirety of our fund reserve, basically to get us to the end of 2021. We hopefully can, we'll need to continue cutting more and more and more along the way. But we go out of business unless either we get to the ballot in either 2021 or 2022, or the Democrats take the Senate in November and we get more federal operating support. So one thing that you all can do to help is to make sure that we get on the ballot locally to finally establish a sustainable fund source for the agency. So we needed this back in January before COVID hit. We had a widening structural deficit even at the peak of a boom economy. The COVID financial crisis has just completely worsened our problem by an order of magnitude. So yeah, we are looking at falling off a financial cliff certainly by 2023.
Oh my God.
Yeah, like a cliff. And we're not alone. I mean, we're actually in better condition than most public transit agencies. The news from BART is, they're facing $1 billion deficit. That was the news this morning, and that is very much true. And BART, because they are so fare box dependent, is
Right.
more vulnerable than we are. At least we get some general fund support, and the general fund is more stable than our sources of revenue.
So, I mean, with such a dire situation just facing you every morning when you wake up, like, what is it that, how do you provide inspiration to your agency to keep going?
Well, I mean, the budgetary and planning issues are actually relatively straightforward. I mean, we know how to do equity analytics around how to do more with less. That is relatively straightforward. We have a phenomenally professional and hardworking crew here. The harder aspect is actually dealing with the emotional impact of the twin financial and health crises on the personal lives of our workforce. My people are just completely exhausted. They've been working 80-hour weeks since March.
Oh, yeah.
They can't sustain this pace. Many of them have children at school and got the news on Friday that that they're, in addition to working 80-hour work weeks, they're also going to have to provide full-time childcare. Our workforce is in a completely impossible situation. Our operators are disproportionately members of vulnerable population groups and have vulnerable population groups at home that they are deeply worried about. I have not had a week go by when my colleagues haven't broken down in tears on Zoom calls. So that's the work that's hard, is supporting the emotional well-being of this deeply, deeply dedicated workforce who knows that they're in the service of the public good, and that if they don't show up every week and put in those 80 hours, that essential workers aren't going to get to work.
Man, amen to all of that. If I could switch the topic to one that's slightly more positive, I saw that you all successfully passed a proposal to implement emergency transit lanes at the most recent MTA board meeting, which was fascinating to me because I had been just talking to one of our customers in Portland, and they basically shared that transit lanes would have been like laughed out of the boardroom because there were so many transit buses that were just passing by neighborhoods with nobody riding in them, and that he was shocked that San Francisco could get something like this passed. So congrats on that. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the approach behind it. And I know it's like only temporary, and what you're hoping to see in the temporary phase that will enable us to make it permanent moving forward.
I mean, thanks in part to the data that we get from you all. We have really, really good data on transit performance. I put our data dashboard up in the chat. Our buses, like bus lines like the 14 Mission, Rapid, are already up to 75% of their pre-COVID ridership.
Wow.
Our buses for our essential workers are full. And we leave hundreds of people behind at the curb every day because our buses are full. We also found during the months of shelter in place that many of our primary transit lines were operating at between 20 to up to 50% faster than they did pre-COVID because there was no traffic congestion. We also found that the places where we did have transit-only lanes, there was no improvement in transit travel speed as a result of shelter in place. So we did the math, and it's pretty straightforward that even at a COVID level of bus capacity, we can move more people in transit-only lanes than in mixed flow lanes. We can move more people per hour. And that is going to be our emphasis for the next couple of years. We need to make the mobility system do more with less. And that means prioritizing space in ways that prioritize the most space-efficient modes of transportation, and also prioritizing people who have the fewest mobility choices over those who have many mobility choices. And so our essential Muni network the 15 lines that carry about 70% of our riders, we need to protect from the congestion that we know is coming as the economy reopens. Otherwise, there will be no economic recovery. Another 20% increase in driving would shut the mobility system down completely so that no one was moving. Our primary function in mobility is creating opportunity and supporting the economy. We are not widening streets in San Francisco anymore. We have no ability to add traffic lanes to accommodate more cars. The best we can do is prioritize the modes of transportation that move the most people per square foot of roadway space. Transit, walking, biking all move 10 times as many people per square foot of roadway as driving alone in a car.
Couldn't agree more. Hey, Rodney. Ooh, Rodney, I think you're muted.
Yep. Thank you very much. I very much enjoy this conversation. Jeffrey, I think that your points of view that we are really, a lot of these challenges are societal questions. It is evident, and I think COVID really pointed out how symbiotic an urban setting is between commerce, transit, equity, workforce, and all of these things are coming together. I absolutely agree with you that hard work is ahead, and denying and pushing off work from others and responsibility is just really not going to be acceptable. I don't mean that from an enforcement perspective, but just we're not going to move ahead if we do the blame game. So there's much hard work ahead. If I can jump in for a second and ask about funding, because that is an immediate problem. When you're talking about a ballot measure, I assume you're talking about a bond of some sort.
Well, so we need, the money that we most urgently need is ongoing, stable operating funds. So capital money is great, but the money that is scarcest and most urgently needed is operating funds. So there's a whole variety of different ways that we can get operating funds. The T2045 work that the Chamber participated in recently sort of enumerated all of the different sources of funds that we could potentially pursue. We need to dust off that document and figure out what's the right path for transportation. Where does transportation fit on the list of all of the dire citywide needs?
Yep. Let me ask forward on a couple of questions that were asked here. If you aren't privileged, don't own a car, but live in a more privileged neighborhood, what is the plan to get some sort of service? Some sort of service option?
Yeah, so there's a lot of San Francisco, like, places like Diamond Heights, where it's, relatively affluent, mostly white, but where there's a high concentration of rent-challenged seniors who are on fixed incomes. These are places that we care a lot about, and it's one of the reasons why back in April, when we had to make the deep service cuts, we invented what we call the essential trip card to give very deep discounts on taxi service for folks over 65 or with disabilities in those neighborhoods. We're now looking at, now that we're sort of settling out at just where our budget is going to settle in August, how to provide better alternatives to folks either living in like the far southwestern corner of the city that's been left behind, or in the very hilly neighborhoods where the service is a little sparse. We were also bringing back some critical lines like the 37 to serve some of those hilly neighborhoods, knowing that we need to provide something there. So the Shop Around Shuttle, the Essential Trip Card, the Essential Worker Ride Home program are three programs that in the meantime provide some critical gap closure. And we're looking at ways of refining those programs to be more targeted at particularly getting folks, say from the Lakewood apartments, not necessarily all the way to downtown San Francisco, but to West Portal, where we're going to be offering very, very good transit service.
Which leads me to another thought, the work from home pattern. People are working from home, but that also means they're sort of shopping and dining within a 15-block radius, sort of a walking circle. Even those little short runs to support neighborhood commercial districts, to people who want to go grocery shopping, walk there, but come back with 2 heavy bags. It'd be very interesting to try to track it. I'm sure you are, some of this short range data, not all the way across town, not even across a bridge, but just within your neighborhood. How are you going to get around to those?
Yeah, so the travel patterns on COVID are dramatically changed. There's almost no transit ridership to the financial district. There's just there's nothing happening there. And yet there's been a huge increase in travel demand in the neighborhood commercial districts. And so all of our focus has turned to the neighborhood commercial districts, both adjusting the Muni system to serve them better, but also our shared spaces programs that we're doing in collaboration with the Department of Public Works and Planning and OEWD in order to reallocate public space in order to help small businesses survive. The neighborhood commercial districts and transit are inextricably linked. All neighborhood commercial districts are built up along former streetcar lines, former Muni lines. And to the extent that the needs of daily life are available within neighborhood commercial districts, that reduces the burden on the mobility system to have people drive to Colma, to a big box store to get their stuff. From a mobility perspective, it is essential that neighborhood commercial districts continue to provide a full array of services. It also then allows us to link up our slow streets planning and our bike share planning and our other walkability and safety improvements planning in order to help people make that half-mile journey to their neighborhood commercial district rather than feel like they need to get in a car and find a parking space or get in a car and drive to the burbs.
Exactly. This question is for the both of you, and this is a little bit of a fun, creative question. So, many of some of the ideas that have come to San Francisco have been tried around the world. And I know as a traffic planner, urban planner, part of your job is to explore the world for new ideas, innovations. What, in a weird way, COVID-19 excites me is that this is much a design challenge, a design solution, physical challenge. Any thoughts about or ideas that maybe you've seen around the world in Europe, Asia, things that have maybe been done for a long time that we've been talking about bringing here, things that are maybe innovative, drawing circles in parks, those very simple, low-cost things, but it could have a great impact going forward.
Yeah, I mean, we love copying other places, in part because when it comes to the city itself, San Francisco is an extremely conservative place. We do not like change in San Francisco, particularly when it comes to streets and mobility. So it's always nice to let somebody else be the beta test site and bring in that innovation later. So the Slow Streets program, the way we're rolling it out, was very much inspired by Oakland. The Circles in the Parks was inspired by Brooklyn. Some of our other Slow Streets work and street reinvention work is very much inspired by Seattle. And of course, I don't ever talk about it because when you talk about what Paris is doing, people assume that it's not relevant. In fact, it's very relevant, particularly if we need to create a significant mode shift towards walking and biking in order to deal with the long-term loss of Muni capacity. Paris is a great example. I spend a lot of time in the Netherlands and in Denmark. So we know the models that work in order to achieve the outcomes that we want. We also understand that they need to be adapted to fit with San Francisco culture. It's particularly true. We've had a lot of learnings from cities like Seoul and Taipei, which I think are very good peer cities for San Francisco. The ability for government to get things done, though, in those cities is quite different than it is in San Francisco. So there's a lot of adaptation we need to make as well.
And I'll just chime in from our perspective, working with almost 350 cities around the world in 22 countries. I've been really inspired by the philosophy that the city of Seattle's put forth, which is around moving quickly, but moving at the speed of trust, especially with regard to their equity program. That really stuck with me. I'm loving the energy coming out of the city of New Orleans. The mayor is on a journey to pedestrianize the entire French Quarter, which is, that would have never been proposed if not for COVID. So the sheer energy and experimentation around cities is one thing that's keeping me going right now. And it's so fulfilling to see that happen in Remix and through our work, and obviously at home here in San Francisco. So if there's one thing to be inspired by, I would say it's that.
Okay, good. We're going to wrap this up. Any last just statements, any requests, any suggestions for those who are on this call?
We're all in it together.
Okay, great. I want to thank you both for participating. This is just the beginning of, I think, many chapters as we unroll and what our solutions are here in San Francisco. Want to thank our sponsors, BuildSF sponsorship, which is made up of Gensler, Hathaway, Dinwiddie, whoops, hang on. Sorry, Hathaway, Dinwiddie, HOK, SOM, and you're going to be able to see some other webinars coming up with Ring Central on July 16th at 10 a.m., August 6th at 10 a.m. Also, HOK, San Francisco Public Works, and the California Department of Motor Vehicles are going to be talking about changes and adaptations. So again, want to thank you and remind you that the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce is a nonprofit organization. We kind of like KQED. We're sponsored by you, the members. So if you can pledge, help us out. We are doing a lot of work in a lot of different arenas, transportation included. Support us. That'd be much appreciated during this difficult time, and we would be happy to support you guys as well. So Jeffrey and Tiffany, again, one more time, thank you very much, and we look forward to talking to you. Keep up the good work. I know it's tough out there, but keep a good chin up, okay? Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us, Rodney.